Okay, well, welcome everybody. So you should all be here for the Meet the Authors. It gives me great pleasure to introduce two guys who I've known for many years now, who I work very closely with, and it's really good to see them here to promote and talk about their new book. So it's James Towers and Aurelijus Morkevicius. You've probably come across them before. If you've been to any of our INCOSE ASECs in the last 6 or 7 years, you would have come across both of them. They're both outstanding in their own right, particularly in the field of model-based systems engineering, and we're here to talk about the book and ask them a few questions. Before we do that, I'd also like to introduce another one of my colleagues, Simon Perry. Simon is the series editor of the Don't Panic Guides. So the reason, if you look at the Don't Panic Guides, the reason they all look so good is because of Simon. All the covers, all the layouts, and the look and feel of everything, that's all down to Simon. So Simon's also got some sort of creative control over the whole process as well. I should introduce myself as well. My name's John Holt. I'm the current technical director of INCOSE UK, and as such, I'm responsible for all the technical publications, amongst other things. So all the books essentially go through me. So when people submit them, I get them reviewed and so on and so on. And as I said, Simon's the series editor. So between the two of us, all the books that you can see so far. The Don't Panic Guides themselves, we've got four out at the moment, sorry. We got the MBSE one, Interfaces, Architectural Frameworks and Architecting, and we've actually got another 3 in the pipeline as well that will hopefully be releasing later in the year, at different parts of the year. So that's the introductions over with. So let's dive straight in. And so if you don't mind, I'll start with the first question, and I'm going to put this to both James and Aurelijus. And it's what we ask everybody when they come on these sessions. So can you just give us a bit of background? What made you decide to write the book in the first place? Where did it come from? Just give us a little bit of background about your start point. Okay, so it's over to you two then, guys.
Do you want to go first, Aurelijus, or shall I go?
No, I think you could probably go first.
I can't remember how the seeds came about. I think actually it may have been a suggestion from John. I think he may have said the series really should have something in it about architecture frameworks, and we should be the people to write it. And I think we thought, not sure about that, and don't know how much work it's going to be, how difficult it's going to be, and so we ummed and ahed for a little bit. But he gave us a few pokes and suggested that we really should. And actually, when we started to think about it, it did make a lot of sense. Not only did we think it was a valuable title in the series, but also given Aurelius's expertise in the field of architecture frameworks, particularly with the UAF and other work that he's done, we thought, yeah, that makes sense for us to write it. And also, I do quite a lot of training and lecturing, and so I talk about this subject. And I did like the idea of trying to distill my thoughts down into an easy, accessible version. And I thought that would be a really good thing to do if I could crystallize how I see architecture frameworks and describe them from a beginner's perspective. So it seemed like a good challenge. It seemed like there was a need for one. And also, it felt like it would be something that we'd be proud of if we were able to accomplish it.
And I think it's worth saying that when we were talking about this right at the beginning, one of the things we try to do with all of the INCOSE UK publications is basically we want people who are well known in the field, who are acknowledged international experts. And that's why I came to you two guys, basically, because apart from anything else, I didn't want anybody else to write one and mess it up. And I knew I could rely on you two. So Aurelijus, over to you.
Yeah, actually, if I remember correctly, it was James who first brought the idea in front of me to work on the book. And I think this is really something, it's been something that is missing in the market today. And there are not many books about frameworks. You can already find some books on SysML, and you can find some books on systems engineering. But when we talk about frameworks, especially like UAF, it's really not so much material. And the book that gives introduction to what kind of thing it is and how it's positioned, I think it's been a great idea and something for this system engineers community to have a look and to learn what are the frameworks, what are the core benefits of them, and then if they want a deeper dive, by contacting authors or attending the author session. So in general, I thought that's a great idea, and why not? If I have James in the team and James can fix my broken English, so why not? We can go ahead with that, and I think it turned out pretty good, and I like the way that James put things together. It's easy to read, smooth, some jokes in it, some British flavor, I would say. So that makes the book interesting for the reader.
I should say that when we did the final review, I don't know if it was post independent review or after, Aurelijus said to me, "You know what? It's turned out all right."
So I'd like to put another question to you, and this is something that's come up. So this is the third one of these sessions that we've done now with Meet the Authors, and obviously Simon and I did one, and then Paul Davies did one. And one of the things that we found, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, is because people say, well, is it difficult writing these books? And I think with the Don't Panic guide, I think for me, one of the most difficult things was trying to distill it down into 55 pages. Yep. And I found that a real challenge. And I know when we brought this up with Paul, he had a few interesting comments as well. So would you like to give us your thoughts on that, please, guys?
Yeah, so actually the way that we tackled it is that we divided the outline up into some sections, and we effectively said, I'll write these sections, you write those sections, and then we'll bring them together. And so one of the dangers with that is that we, in order to control that, we gave ourselves a budget for how much we thought each section would be. And actually, it wasn't until we'd actually drafted the first version we could see how complicated a chapter was or how much information. So that was very difficult. But you're absolutely right, because one of the considerations is we wanted the book to be self-contained, so as much as it could be. So we felt we needed to introduce some basic concepts, such as there's a definition there of what we mean by system and what we mean by architecture before we even introduce the concept of an architecture framework. And that's very difficult because you could write books just on those topics. And so finding a crisp definition and a definition which is applicable to the book was really difficult. And wherever possible, we took definitions from existing Don't Panic guides. So that was the easiest thing. But I completely agree to get a narrative all the way through the book so it made sense as you read it from front to back, and to also to cover the topics you needed to introduce, but only in sufficient detail. That was a real challenge. But I think is often the case with this, the most benefit has been to Aurelijus and I as authors, because it really made us think about what was important to architecture frameworks and what's not important to architecture frameworks. And so I personally have got a much better understanding from writing the book than I think I would have had if somebody else had written it and I'd read it, which I think is brilliant for me. Hard luck for you lot, but brilliant for me.
I think the credit goes to James here. I wrote a lot more, and he just threw out a lot of text that I put in the book. Well, one of the things, there are a lot of frameworks, and when we start thinking and brainstorming, there is DODAF, it's MODAF, it's NAF, it's DINDAF, which is Canadian one. And at the end, we put all of them in a single chapter, just to avoid writing about every one of those. It's just to condense, because they're really similar, and they have a lot of commonalities in them, and then just not to duplicate. We just suppressed it into a single chapter, and so that helped a lot.
That raises another really great point, which is that we did have a discussion at one point about whether or not we should ignore enterprise architecture frameworks and say that this is a systems engineering publication and therefore we're not interested in enterprise architecture frameworks. But then it did occur to us that when you talk to most people about architecture frameworks, the first ones they think of are enterprise architecture ones. And therefore it would seem a little bit odd, and also it would make it less accessible if we didn't at least acknowledge them and give a brief overview of what they were. And so that was a really interesting thing, because you could have had one viewpoint where we said they were not relevant, and we had to think about the wider stakeholder group and say, well, no, it won't make sense if we don't at least introduce them.
Okay, excellent. So I've got another question for you before we take some general questions from the floor. And this is, to be quite blunt, why would somebody buy the book? What's in it for them? So, you know, what's the sort of take homes that we get from the book? And, you know, why should people invest the princely sum of £15 in it?
Well, I mean, I have financial commitments and a family to feed, so that's one of the reasons why they should do it. But being more serious, if you use architecture frameworks in your role, or you work with people who use architecture frameworks, then it's important to have an understanding, at least at basic level, what they are, and also perhaps understand what benefits they can bring to your project. And so it is very much an introductory book. I hope that it also illuminates some concepts for practitioners who have been using them for a while, by at least describing them from a slightly different viewpoint. To acknowledge that, no pun intended there, to acknowledge that you can view architecture frameworks in different ways. And actually, I think that's one of the things the book's really good, because it talks about defense frameworks and the UAF and the MBSE grid and the enterprise architecture framework, Zachman, TOGAF. It allows you to understand the commonalities and also the differences between those things, which makes you realize what the essence of an architecture framework is, rather than the window dressing of an architecture framework. And I think it's particularly useful for making you think about whether or not you should develop your own architecture framework, and whether that's the most appropriate thing to do. So I think that's where the power lies with the book.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's really, I think first of all, it gives a bit of a background. I constantly get a lot of questions, you know, what should I use for my project? Is that is there UAF should be used, or DODAF? It's really very common question. Then some people bring up the MBSE grid, and what's the connection here with the UAF? Which one I supposed to use, and how I can transition from one to the other. So these are actually common questions, and I also been working on the topic for INCOSE International Symposium, where I present the paper on transitioning from UAF to SysML using the MBSE grid. So I think the book really gives you a basic understanding on the different frameworks, and answers a bit on when you should use which I believe is really missing information. And you know, also the book is great for me. They work in the company with 20,000 employees. It really helps my colleagues to understand better where I'm coming from. And I really I want to say that I'm really happy that this book goes into e-format. I don't know when it's going to be introduced. Maybe John can elaborate a bit on that, but I heard the news, and I'm really excited, because there are a lot of people in different countries who are really looking forward to get the book.
Okay, thanks for that, Aurelijus. So on that note, yeah, so if people aren't aware, we haven't done the press release on it yet, but we're actually, all of the INCOSE UK books are going to be available very soon, within the next week or so, as ebooks as well. We're selling all of the books right across the world at the moment. But thanks to a little thing called Brexit, the postage costs and the import costs can cost more than the book itself, which is, anyway, let's not go down that. But anyway, so obviously ebooks are very attractive for many people. So we're just waiting on some of the agreement forms back from some of the other authors, and that's going to be up and running as soon as those are back. So the ebooks are all formatted and ready to go. We're just waiting for some of the authors to sign the forms. And likewise, we'll also be making the books available on Amazon in the next few weeks as well. So you'll be able to buy them through your favourite tax dodging book site. Online. So I'd like to see if there's any people who are present. Sorry, I'm just letting somebody else in. See if there's any people that are present. Does anybody have any questions for the authors before we continue? Anyone in particular? Just sort of unmute and speak if you've got a question for somebody. Resounding silence from people at the moment. Okay, well,
Steve here.
Oh, Steve. Okay, so Steve,
Yeah.
do you just want to sort of introduce yourself very briefly?
Okay, Steve Willis. I work at Airbus in Defence and Space.
Okay.
And what I'd like to know is, do you see any trends that are happening now that give a shelf life to what's in the book, and how will it be kept up?
Okay, good question. So yeah, the shelf life of the book, how will it be kept up to date? Because we are in you know, this is an area where there's constant changes coming on. So yeah, so over to James and Aurelijus for that.
So actually, this was a real concern when we were writing the book, because we were aware from even when we started that ISO 42010 is under revision. Thankfully, we have got some contacts into Working Group 42 that are revising that. Both Aurelijus and I know people in that group, and so we were aware of some of the emerging changes that were coming through, and so we tried to capture what we thought were the important ones and kind of preempt them. We couldn't be sure what was going to happen, but we were guessing at what we thought the way direction it would go. But you're absolutely right. As soon as the new 42010 standard is released, as soon as that gets approved, then our plan is to create an updated version of the book that takes into account those changes. And the plan is then to periodically, perhaps every 2 years or so, review it to see if there are any important changes that we need to encompass. So it may well be the case that, for instance, in a few years' time, we decide that it's no longer relevant to reference MODAF or something like that, and we decide to take it out, or I don't know, we'll see. Or there might be a new framework, or there might be a new version of the UAF. So yeah, that's one of the dangers with having a book which references so many standards, is the standards get updated. So yeah. And also, I'm looking forward to receiving feedback. So if people think that it misses an important aspect, or even disagrees with something that we've said in there, then we'll certainly take that into account in any updates.
Thank you.
I can see that Simon's got his hand up. So Simon, have you got something to say on this matter?
Yes, just to say that, you know, if anybody is interested in doing one of these books, you know, please submit. But this issue of updates, you know, is something that we're aware of. But the beauty of being able to publish them through in Cozy is we can turn around a new edition in days. You know, if James and Aurelijus make a change, you know, they can send me the file, and you know, I just double check it. We can send it off. I mean, you know, sometimes we've gone through 3 or 4 versions in a week where typos have been spotted, and that's the fantastic thing. You know, as soon as we find, you know, even some typos that are spotted, we can do a new edition straight away. You know, they're printed on demand, you know, when in Cozy.
And I think that's so important, Si, because we've got absolute control over everything, haven't we?
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
You have change management of this in place.
Well, yeah, I keep all of the, you know, I've got all of the previous builds of all the previous versions. Yeah, so
and it's a good reason for people to buy multiple copies.
Yeah, get the whole.
I can see Stephen's got his hand up. So Stephen, Powley, do you just want a couple of words to introduce yourself and then say?
Oh, hi. Yeah, I'm a mature student doing a PhD at Coventry University. Simon there is my industry supervisor. And I've been looking at the application of model-based systems engineering and ontology engineering techniques to enterprises in the context of automotive cybersecurity. That was a long sentence, right? So my question is, in my ontology work, I keep coming across pattern languages, and they look pretty much the same as architecture frameworks to me. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on where the line between, where something stops being a pattern language and becomes an architecture framework, or are they just different names for the same thing? What do you feel?
Good question there from Stephen. So James, so pattern languages. So do either of you want to say a few words about that?
So I think what I would say is that I think the difference between a pattern language and architecture framework is like the difference between a subsystem and a system, in that it's really just on your perspective where you sit in the hierarchy. And I think you're absolutely right. So most people think of a pattern language as being applicable across multiple architecture descriptions. but there's clearly some architectures which are applicable across multiple systems, aren't they? So I think the same thing applies. It's just whichever level you're at. And interestingly enough, you're probably aware, Stephen, that one of the frameworks that we talk about in the book is John and Simon's FAF, which is the framework for architecture frameworks, which they use for defining both patterns and for architecture frameworks. And so effectively, what they have said by doing that is that they are the same thing. They are the same beast.
It's like meta framework. Right? A
meta framework, exactly.
Yeah. Well, actually, in general, this just to add to this, we constantly have an issue with the terminology here, and we have frameworks, we have methods, and it's really sometimes difficult to distinguish which thing falls into which category. Like recently, within the context of NATO, there is the Archimate language used, which is coming from business and IT. Some people call it framework, where for me it's more like a modeling language. Some people call it meta model, where I really don't see it as a meta model. It's more like a notation to and diagrams. So it's really not easy to categorize those things and to define what's the framework. And here we have ISO 42010 at least dealing with some of the concepts, but still usually there are a lot of issues with terminology in this area.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay. So hopefully that addresses your question, Stephen. Have you got any other thoughts on that, Stephen, before we move on?
No, that pretty much echoes what I'd decided for myself. I just wanted to throw it out there and see if I was missing something.
Okay. All right. That's great. So, and any more questions from the floor before we move on?
Yeah, very quick one from me, John.
Okay, Kim, just very quickly introduce yourself, Kim.
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. Yeah, so Kim Stansfield, I am in the process of starting to write the Don't Panic, Absolute Beginners for QFD, having used the technique for about 30 years in both system architecture and enterprise architecture. So the question, and I should say that I've recently gone into partial retirement, so I am now free to actually write the book. So my question is, James touched on it, talking about difference between enterprise architecture and system architecture. Having worked as a business architect, enterprise architect, as well as a system architect, I struggle to see the difference. And it did strike me that better understanding of system engineering would have helped a lot of enterprise architects. So my question is really, how do we, or are we planning to use these books to draw in the broader communities? I think you started to touch on this, James, to help them understand why systems engineering as a whole really will help strengthen things like enterprise architecture.
I think that's a really good point, Kim. And if I may, I'm going to ask Simon to comment on this to begin with, because Simon's, Simon and I basically sat down and came up with the idea for the Don't Panic guides. Yeah. And so, Simon, do you just want to give us just a few words very briefly about, well, people have often asked us this, what on earth was going through our minds at the time? What's the intent behind the whole Don't Panic guide in the series? Because we've now actually got another series of books as well, which is the Advanced Applications System.
Yeah.
So Simon, you just want to say a few words on the intent behind them, and then we'll ask for James and Aurelijus' opinion.
Yes, I mean, it's very much driven by the realization that there are a lot of people in systems engineering. There are a lot of people that do systems engineering that don't think of themselves as systems engineers. That's one thing. And that there are a lot of concepts and techniques that we as systems engineers can bring to other disciplines that aren't brought to other disciplines. And it's almost not wanting to scare the horses. You know, what we wanted was a set of books that each book focused on a specific topic to do with systems engineering. That, as the title says, you know, you can, you know, if you can read and understand, you know, language and think for yourself, you should be able to get some understanding from the books about what that topic is. And
so sorry, Si, I think one of the reasons we call it Don't Panic is one of our other many books that we've written is 1,000 pages long, and it's all about MBSE. Yes.
Yeah.
And the first thing that people do when they see that
is
and they realize it weighs over 3 kilos.
Yeah.
It's panic. So
yeah. So it was wanting to have a series of small, easily digestible books that were concise and to the point on topics to do with systems engineering that maybe people, what's the phrase, early career people in systems engineering. So we don't necessarily mean, you know, young people, but people that are coming in to systems engineering as a sort of new career, or as we say, you know, people that are just sort of interested in those topics and you know, can get something out of it. We you know, John and I have people sometimes come on our courses that, you know, are more at the management level in an organization, and actually, you know, aren't really doing any engineering at all. And even for them, you know, for them being able to go away and read a book like our Don't Panic MBSE book, it gives them a really good sort of overview of what it is that their staff are talking about. So, you know, there's a benefit there as well, you know. So, and it's the same with James's and Aurelijus's book, with all these books. You know, if you're a manager in an organization and you're managing staff that are bandying words around, like, you know, architecture and architecture framework and Zachman and Modaf, and you haven't got a clue what they're talking about, you know, it can be, well, you know, it means you can't do your job properly. But a book like their Don't Panic Guide is just a brilliant sort of overview for, you know, for any interested reader. You don't have to be a systems engineer to get stuff out of it. You know, it's, you know, in theory,
and if the Don't Panic Guides are too taxing for you, there's always Think Engineer, of course. So okay, so yes. Aurelius, what are your thoughts on that matter?
I actually almost forgot the question, but yeah, I think it's really great question, and probably here I would answer it as the not as the author of this book, but as the chairman of the UAF standard within OMG, and it's really the area of enterprise architects, as you said. It's really what we recently want to target with the big support from organizations like Boeing, Airbus, Airspace Corporation. They're really looking into expanding their enterprise architecture from being pictures and being PowerPoints into something more formal, and something that you can look at from the system engineering perspective. So we have this kind of a trend, enterprise as a system, because, you know, enterprise is just another type of system, probably very quite complex, or maybe system of systems at some point. But this is where you can really apply similar practices and go beyond what it is currently with the current approaches that are usually more drawing than the modeling. So I believe this is a good point. Yeah.
Can I just jump in as well, and on the back of that? And the other thing as well is you speak to a lot of people about enterprise architecture, and what they actually mean is their IT architecture. There's no enterprise architecture in there at all.
No, absolutely.
You know, and
as a business architect, this was exactly what used to drive me mad.
Yeah.
Because the enterprise guys would be talking, all they were talking about was the technology.
Yeah.
You know, the IT technology, not about what's the business trying to do and how do we make sure it all works coherently together.
Yeah, and that's just systems engineering. You know, what are the requirements for the build? You know, treat the business as a system. You know, what does it have to do? What processes does it have to follow? You know, what things does it have to, you know, produce? You know, it is just systems engineering at the organization level. Yeah.
But by the way, I think this is also something that is probably missing from Incozy Vision, and I recently had a good discussion with Gan Wang, Dr. Gan Wang from BAE Systems. Probably some of you met him in INCOSE events. That really we should address this when reviewing the vision for INCOSE 2035, and to add this kind of thread, enterprise as a system, as a part of the INCOSE vision.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Okay, Rick, so is that I think we probably covered your question there, Kim. I think that was a really good discussion.
Yeah. We could probably carry on talking for 2 days, but yeah, thanks guys.
Okay, thanks for that, Kim. So any more questions from the floor? Otherwise, I'll ask another question to them. Okay, well, I want to ask you a little bit, and we like to do this on these sessions, and ask you, James has already touched on it, but about your sort of writing process, because when people write, everybody writes in different ways. So as I say, Simon and I have been long time writing co-authors and collaborators, and even we both write in very different ways, don't we, Simon? So I tend to just do an outpour of what's in my head, goes into the page. Yeah, and then Simon corrects all my dyslexia mistakes. So.
Yeah, and I think that's very, very true, and it's very important. Yeah, I mean, I would characterize. Yeah, you do a brain dump, which then might need to be edited 3 or 4 times, but you get your stuff down really quickly. I'm a very slow writer, but what I write is probably 99%, you know, what the final version will be. Yeah. So it is, that difference in style, you know, is something that particularly if people are thinking of doing a collaboration, is something that you might have to take into account.
So how did you both work together then, James and Aurelijus? What are your individual styles and how did they work? Did they clash or were they complementary? What were your experiences there?
So as I explained earlier, that we did kind of I did kind of take a role of integrating our work together. So as Aurelius said, we wrote some bits separately. I then chopped lots of Aurelius' stuff out because it was bigger than I wanted to be. Left all my stuff in. No, that's not quite true. But I did a kind of an edit of the whole book to try and bring it together. And we thought that was the wise thing to do because to give it a single voice and give it a single style. But I have to say that when we reviewed it, there were lots of times when Aurelius said, "Oh, I think you need to explain that bit again, and I don't quite understand it." And so that was really quite useful. But so doing the bits that I was working on, I did do an outline, and I did what's traditionally known as busy work. So I filled in all the bits that I didn't need to think about. So I did all the bits I knew were going to be there in the sort of order, and then spent time thinking about the other bits I needed to explain. And it gradually took shape and started to get its own voice. There's a really interesting part, well, interesting for me, in that originally it took me ages to try and describe the concept of emergent properties in a system. And I thought that was important to talk about the fact that a system is not just a collection of entities, that they interact together and they have emergent properties. And I wrote that section about 3 or 4 times, and it was quite big, and it was just not coming together. It was just not getting what I needed to do. And eventually I just realized that I was trying to put too much into it. I was trying to tackle the subject in more detail than it needed to have. And so I tried to then condense it down into what's the simplest possible example I could come up with that. And I found it and I wrote it, and it took up, you know, like a quarter of a page. And I was really pleased with that because the approach I'd got before that was just not condensing. It was just not converging into the right thing. And so there were bits like that which were really difficult, but when they clicked, they clicked. Some of the other decisions which I found quite difficult, for instance, if you've read the book, you'll know that it starts out with a joke. And I really wasn't sure whether or not that was the right tone to open the book. But then I thought about it for a bit, and I kind of thought that it would seem a bit odd for people who know me, if I didn't start it with a joke, or I didn't at least have a joke in there somewhere. So the other thing to look out for as well is there's 3 or 4 other in-jokes in there. So if you know me, see if you can find them.
but I think that's an important point, and I think that's something that, and one of the nice things about having absolute creative control over INCOSE UK, as we do, is because Simon and I, we got 4 different publishers between us, and some of them are very, very formal and very strict, and they don't. But I think it's actually nice that we can see both yours and Aurelius's personalities actually come out in the book. and you can recognize the style. And like you say, James, it's I mean, we'll call it a joke for now, but it does open with this anecdote, but this is the point. But we know, and you can see you coming out of the book, and the same with Aurelijus, and you can kind of see different aspects of you, and I think that's very important. So Aurelijus, what are your thoughts on the matter?
I think James actually did a great job in integrating the bits and pieces we put together. It's as this is not our main full-time job to write the books. Of course, we did a lot of work in evenings or weekends, and wasn't easy sometimes to find a way to exchange, but finally we managed somehow to do it. We collaborated on shared drive or OneDrive and on the Word document, adding comments, and I think it turned out pretty well, and James did a lot of good editing and put some jokes in my sections, so so that they get better readable. The people from the north, they're not so funny as people in the south, and the jokes they don't go easy, especially when you write in evenings after the hard day at work. But at the end, James did a great job here and helped a lot. And then just a small note, when I write, when Simon mentioned that he's a slow writer but he gets it right at the first time. For me, the biggest challenge, and probably I would say I'm a fast writer, but the biggest challenge is really sometimes to Google which would be the best English phrase for because I kind of know what I want to say, but I'm interested in how correctly it should be said in proper English, and so then I spend a lot of time in Googling and trying to find the right words, and then when it goes to James suddenly changed them again. So that was kind of a process.
Okay, very good. Now, there was an added complexity, shall we say, with your book, because at the same time, simultaneously, there was another Don't Panic book being written, which was on architectures and architecting by Mike Wilkinson and Tim Rabbits, of course. So do you want to, and now this was a bit of potentially, we could have had quite a few problems over this, because obviously we wanted the two books to agree with one another, or more importantly, we didn't want them to clash. We didn't want them to come up with. So do you want to say a few words on that? In fact, I'm going to ask Simon first of all, because you're the series editor. You're kind of the referee amongst these, because we've got a similar situation coming up, haven't we? You're muted, Si.
From my point of view, it wasn't a problem. We had a very brief chat at the beginning, and it was agreed that the books were going to reference each other. And I think what worked for those two books is each sort of side sort of reviewed and had view of the other side's book, as it were. As you've said, John, we've got the same thing coming up potentially coming up on some of the next books, where we may actually have three books that potentially need to reference each other. And again, we're trying to do the same thing. Then we've had a somewhat successful, given rural broadband call, and the three groups of authors are aware that they have got to they've got to liaise with each other. What I did as series author for that was I went through the proposals for the three books and essentially sort of mapped the links between the three submissions so that we could see where there were potential clashes. And ultimately, it's down to the authors to work together on that. Me as a series editor, yes, I can step in if I think that's not being done. But I mean, I have to say for James's book and James and Aurelijus's book and Mike and Tim's book, I think I had to answer about two or three questions. I think James, you might have asked me, what shall I put in the front, because their book's not going to be ready before ours. And I think I said, well, put forthcoming, and it from my point of view, it was great. You guys worked together really, really brilliantly, and I pretty much had nothing to do, which was nice. But it is an issue, and of course, as the series grows, that potentially is going to become a bigger and bigger issue, that we do want the books to sit and work together, and we're going to be potentially at what, 7 or 8 books maybe, this year or into next year. That's absolutely. So we've gone from 1 book to 8 books in the space of about 4 years. And I think it is going to be interesting at that point to see, is it becoming too onerous to try and keep a sort of single voice? But I mean, I think, as John, as you said right at the start, we took the decision that all the books are having the same look and feel, are all set out the same. So anybody buying a Don't Panic book knows it's a Don't Panic book, because they all look the same. And I think that as well, and the restricted size helps, because as an author, you haven't got space to go, massively into really, really massive amounts of detail, which potentially then could contradict somebody else, because you're all working at that overview level. There is I guess there's a sort of natural limit to how much you can contradict each other when you're working at quite a high level anyway. But yeah, so far it hasn't been a problem. It's worked really well. Okay. I mean, let me ask James and Aurelijus. I mean, from your point of view, you probably saw it more than me working with Tim and Mike.
Yeah. So actually, it was really beneficial, because, and the reason I say that is because when we were reviewing each other's material, often they would ask questions and they'd show a viewpoint that we'd not considered. So a really great one is, initially, there was even a query over the title, because as Tim Rebetz pointed out, the concept of architecture framework in the ISO standards is slightly wider than what we were talking about, which is architecture description frameworks. And so we had to address that in the book. In fact, there's a short note in there that says that ISO now includes architecture description frameworks and architecture evaluation frameworks, but we're only talking about the description ones. And so that was really useful. And the general principle that I took was, with all the things that could potentially overlap, is that we wanted a definition of things that was sufficient for our needs, and then we just referenced other works. So we describe what we mean by architecture in the book, but we say this is a basic definition of architecture just to get you through this book. If you want to know more, go and look in the Architecture and Architecting book. So all the time we try to do that. And the first thing, where we define system and system elements, we reuse the definitions from your Don't Panic book on MBSE, because again, the definitions are completely, well, don't want to say adequate, that's not the right word. They were appropriate for the style of book that we were writing. And so, there's no need to over-egg the pudding. Lots that you can reuse these things. I mean, you can envisage a scenario where the authors disagree on a topic, but I think the thing there is that the objective is not to correct people or to give a different view. All you need to do is state the minimum, and if there's deviation above that, that's fine. It's bound to happen. So yeah.
Okay, Aurelijus, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think again, James did a great job here. I participated in a couple of meetings with the guys, but mainly James took over this responsibility as we really had a tough time finding the right time for everyone. So he did a great job, and I think at the end, as James said, right, that there were some very good points from the colleagues that we took and we applied to our book, and at the end, I think we managed the situation and really avoided any kind of conflicts within these books.
I have to say as well is that the final review stage actually was really helpful, because you can often be quite frightened by this, that you'll get lots of negative feedback and people won't understand what you're trying to say. But the feedback that came back was actually really constructive. In fact, I think there were some suggestions. Somebody said, for instance, you should put the enterprise architecture chapter further in the book, because it'll help the flow. And they said, break this section out into its own section. And comments like that were really useful. And when we did them, we went, oh, I can't believe we never thought of that. It makes it such a better book if you structure it that way.
In fact, that's a good point, James. I'll just say a few words about the actual the review process. So it's a variation on our everything, any technical publication that comes out of Incosi UK goes through a review process, regardless of what it is. Okay, if it's got the Incosi UK logo on it, it goes through a review process. The process for the books is, first of all, you submit you submit a proposal. So essentially there's a standard set of headings that you need to you need to answer. You submit a proposal. It then comes to me, and I talk to Simon about it, and then we discuss, do we think it's an appropriate topic? For example, does it fall under the banner of systems engineering, and that kind of thing. At that point, then I will then identify 3 reviewers who are experts in the field, or know about the topic and can give a really good informed opinion about things. The proposal is then sent to those reviewers, and then each one reviews it and they give a score out of 10. And basically we have cut-off points. So 0 to 3, we won't publish it. 4 to 7, it will, yes, we'll consider publishing it with some changes. 8 to 10, yes, green light, goes straight away. So basically we go through, and your one didn't have to go through any iterations, because it straight away, all 3 reviewers said, yes, this needs to be published as a book, which is very good. So once you've gone through the proposal stage, you then get the green light to go and write the book. Then when the book is written, when you've got the first complete draft, it then goes back to the same 3 reviewers, and then they can, so basically their job then is to say, is this the book that was promised at the beginning, and then give some feedback. Now, but and the point you raised there, James, is a very good one, and this is, and it's this idea of the reviewers aren't there to criticize you or pull it apart. As soon as it's gone through the proposal process, those 3 reviewers want this to be published. So when you get your comments, so it's a slightly different take than when you're submitting something for the conference, for example, the ASEC. And also the reviewers have to know who you are. So this isn't a double-blind review process like we use for the ASEC. So they'll know who you are. You know who the reviewers are. And actually, and in your case, it was with some of them, it's quite a good relationship to have, because they want it to succeed. So when they give you comments, rather than sort of harsh criticisms or whatever that we sometimes get with ASEC reviews, it's actually all very positive, and it might work better. Have you thought about this? And I think that's a very important point, is that the reviewers are actually there to make sure the book is published as good as it can possibly be, because that's what we're interested in. And that's why, as I say, we want acknowledged experts in the field, and the reviewers are there to encourage you through the whole process. So yeah, I think that's a very good point to make there, James. Okay. So let's see, is there any, I'm seeing we've got a couple of things in the in the chat. So we've got something there saying, how about a don't panic architecture framework to manage the future harmonization challenges across? Okay, so maybe this forms a don't panic guide to concept harmonization. Yeah, so there's a good font there. Someone's also said, can they get any pages from the book? I think you'd have to contact Incosi UK publications about that, because we although, like I say, they're under my remit, the commercial side of things is done through Incosi UK, so contact them about that kind of thing. So are there any more questions from the floor before we progress? We've got just over 5 minutes left, so we've got time for another quick couple of questions. Otherwise, I will pose another one. Okay, hang on, so I'm just, oh God, we've gone across 2 pages. I'm just seeing if anybody's got their hands up or anything. Okay, that's good. So really then, sort of back to Aurelijus and James. So what are your final thoughts on as an experience of writing? Because this is your first. I know Aurelijus, you've written the Magic Grid thing before, book before. But what were your experiences as authors as well? If we can ask that. So James, this is your first book. Aurelijus, I believe it's your second one, isn't it, after the Magic Grid book? So what's your overall experience of the whole process? I mean, are you scarred for life now, or does it give you the, you know, have you got the bug now to write more? So so Aurelijus, what are your thoughts?
Well, basically my writing experience has been papers, and a lot of papers, and you know, the PhD thesis, which is kind of a big paper. And at the end, I think this is slightly different, you know, because the style that I felt, that style that I'm using when I wrote this book is really more on papers. And when you write paper, you really focus on you know, that every sentence is really you know, the kind of verifiable. It's more like a requirements engineer, right? When you write requirements, and when you write the book, it's really where James helped a lot. It's really more adding readability, as opposed to the to just the dry facts, right? So I felt it's different, and it's a good experience really to use this kind of style, even if it's a technical book. It's not a novel, but anyways, it's still different, because you want that the reader would have some pleasure in reading the book, not only just you know, another guy trying to reference your paper, so I think it's different, because you need
it's
to.
It's a very different style, isn't it? And and that's the whole. You know, you wouldn't start an academic paper, one would hope, with one of James's jokes.
Oh, for sure.
Okay, James, what are your thoughts?
So for me, it's best summarized by, I think it's the quote we've got above the author section in the book, which is that a writer is somebody who finds writing more difficult than ordinary people. And it's interesting you say I've been scarred for life. I think it's the kind of the equivalent, the male equivalent of having children, in which it was the worst experience of my life while I was doing it, but now it's over. It's the best thing I've ever done. Yeah. And yeah, it was at times, like, so when I was struggling to formulate areas and get them to be concise and say what I needed, it was terrible. I'm also a terrible procrastinator, so I did look at a blank page for many weeks before I started. But once I got into the zone, as they say, it was quite enjoyable. In fact, to the point that there were some times when if I'd finally worked out what I wanted to say, I couldn't put it down until I'd got it all down on the page, and so that bit was enjoyable. But it's a different creative process, isn't it? And that's the thing I'm aware of. And like Aurelius says, the bit that was a real journey for me, and the bit I think I learned the most out of it, was how to turn perfectly adequate, good sections into a continuous book. And that bit was a really good learning curve for me. And I think that was actually the most enjoyable bit when I finally read it for the umpteenth time and realized that it wasn't disparate sections, but it actually had a thread all the way through it. At that point there, I thought, it's finished. And so that was good.
Good bit of systems integration.
Yeah. Okay.
And so let's get the, you know, how pleased were you with the final product? So Aurelius, when the first hard copy landed on your door, were you pleased with it?
Absolutely. I waited quite a lot, because you mentioned Brexit before, so it really took a while since I got the book. They stuck in customs, and it's been more than a month to get them. but finally, you know, I'm really happy. I enjoyed reading it. I really like the James style and how he integrated everything together. So I have to say it turned out really good, and as I said to James, it turned out a lot better than I expected.
A lot better than I expected.
Yeah, because it is a nice moment when you first open it and you see, and it is. I mean, I wouldn't liken it to
when you smell it, right?
Yeah, because you do actually get a little bit of money out of the book, unlike children, of course. So that's one of the main differences. Yeah. And of course, you can always send it back, unlike children. So
you've got the wrong kind of children, John. Medical experiments for the lot of them.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think that's we've our time's up. So first of all, I'd like to thank both Aurelius and James for participating in this. I hope everybody's got something out of it. It's been a very good session. It's been recorded, so this will be available via the Incozy website, as well, the Incozy UK website as well. So should you want to point anybody towards it or reference it, please do. I hope you got something out of it. If you've already got the book, I hope you've enjoyed it, and hopefully this has been good for you to actually meet the authors and get some of the background behind it. If you haven't already bought the book, why not? Okay, that's it, James, hold it up. That's good. Okay. And you know, please do consider buying it. There's, as Simon was saying, there's 4 in the range at the moment. By the end of the year, we're hoping there's going to be 7 of them. If you are interested in, oh, look at that. So he's got
hey, where did you get that many?
So in fact, you can see that the covers are the same look and feel to the covers as well, and with the distinctive "Don't Panic" and then a different coloured slash going across each one. So yeah, somebody's asking if there's a box set available by Christmas. Yeah, we're thinking of doing the special Incozy UK shelf that's expandable. So as time goes on, you can slot more and more books into them.
Can we make them like the Mr. Men books? So when you put them together, you get a character on the spine.
Well, I think we should do it like a part work. You buy the first one for 99p, and then it's a tenner an edition, and there's 1,000 parts to get
for the rest of your life. You get a Don't Panic for each Monday morning. So, but yeah, so hopefully you got something out of it. So again, finally, just really like to thank Aurelijus and James for taking the time to come and sort of have a chat, give us their thoughts and their opinions. Simon, thanks very much as well as series editor.
No worries.
It's been really worthwhile having you here as well. It's good to get your insights into the sessions as well. As I said, if you are interested in getting involved in writing ones, like Kim was saying that he's going to be looking towards doing one on QFDs, get in contact, email me at technical director at Incozy UK, and thanks very much for your participation. And we'll hope to see you again soon. And everybody register for the ASEC. I have to say that.